Welcome to One on One with Mitch Lafon. Joining me on this episode, it is Chicago guitarist Keith Howland. We look back on the band's storied career, talk about their current tour with Earth, Wind, and Fire, discuss Terry Kath, Peter Cetera, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and a lot more. Before checking out Keith, please check me out on Twitter at Mitch Lafon, MITCHLAFON, One on One, Mitch Lafon on Facebook, and paypal.me/Mitch Lafon should you care to support the podcast. And with that, here is the one, the only, Chicago guitarist, Keith Howland. We are speaking with Keith Howland, guitarist for the band Chicago. They are in Montreal on October 28th. Pleasure to speak with you, Keith.
It's a pleasure to be here. How you doing?
Doing well. So let's talk about the tour first. You're going to be in town very shortly. What can fans expect on this run?
Well, I mean, not to sound trite, but they can expect more of the same. This is our fourth go around with Earth, Wind, and Fire, and we've taken a bit of an "if it ain't broke, don't fix it" mentality. Little changes here and there, and the production is certainly more impressive than it's ever been on this most recent go around with the projection screens we're using, and it's pretty nuts. I mean, Tris, our drummer, is about 40 feet in the air behind me. If it gives you any idea of what the staging is like, I'm exaggerating slightly, but it is. It's a pretty huge production, and it's quite the spectacle. The closing 30 minutes of the show, the 6-song encore with both bands on stage, which is about 23 people, I think, all playing hits from both bands, that's worth the price of admission alone. The rest is gravy. So that's kind of what it is. It's nothing quite like it out there, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, there really isn't. Now, the band's been around for 50 years. You're Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You've been with them since 1995. What is it about Chicago music that just keeps the fan base so interested and just keeps people coming back?
That's a good question, because I really think there's been a resurgence as of late of sort of a newer generation discovering the music of the late 60s and the 70s. I see so many kids walking around with, AC/DC T-shirts and, Supertramp and Cheap Trick and all these bands. And so we're seeing 3 generations come and see the shows. You see the grandparents, the parents, and the kids, and they all know the words and they're all enjoying the show, which is a pretty cool thing. I know me personally, I still listen to the music that I grew up listening to. I still pull out my Steely Dan records and my Toto records and my Journey records and even Chicago records, even though I've been playing with the guys. Those records from the 70s I grew up listening to. So, that's still, a different listening experience for me to listen to those records than what we even are doing now. So it's just kind of it's a kind of a cool thing, and people are still connecting to what they grew up with, and their kids are too.
In fact, so let's talk about those 70s records, because the guitarist on that was Terry Kath, and he just was phenomenal. So were you, as a guitarist, attracted to what he was doing in terms of his style and his approach to the guitar?
Absolutely. Terry was probably one of my earliest influences, maybe with the exception of Tony Peluso, who was in the Carpenters band. His solo on "Goodbye to Love" was like one of the first sort of rock guitar solos I ever heard, and it really kind of set me on my ear. But then my older brother brought Chicago 2 home, probably somewhere around 1971. And I was only 7 years old at the time. He's 4 years older than me, and his drum instructor wanted him to check out Danny Seraphin. And I remember he brought it home in quadraphonic stereo, 4-speaker quadraphonic, and we sat in his room right in the center of the room with the four speakers around us, and we listened to that whole record. And I remember just thinking, wow, I've never heard anything like this before. And it was so cool and so diverse and so musical. We were fans from that point forward. And yeah, Terry's guitar playing for sure. I saw them in '75 at the Capitol Center in Largo, Maryland, with Terry. And, it was mind blowing, for a, what was I then? An 11-year-old kid who was just starting to pick up the guitar.
Yes,
for sure.
Yeah, he was something just absolutely unique and special. Just the way he handled it. So 1995, you joined the band. They have this sort of 30-year legacy going at that point. What was it like for you when you first sort of showed up and plugged in and then realized, okay, I've got the gig. Oh my, like, what do I do now kind of thing?
Yeah, it took me a while to get over the sort of pinch me aspect of it. The audition was really surreal. I remember during the audition we started playing, I think it was Does Anybody Really Know What Time It Is? And when Robert Lamb started to sing, I almost stopped playing because I was so flabbergasted that Robert Lamb was standing like 4 feet away from me singing, a song that I'd obviously seen them do in concert many times. I saw the band probably a good 7 or 8 times before I auditioned to play with the group. So yeah, that was kind of a trip, and Jimmy Pankow sliding up next to me on stage playing his trombone sort of freaked me out for a little while, and I still have moments like that where I kind of still go, wow, it's 2 decades later, a little over 2 decades later, and there've been a lot of bucket list things. I mean, we played for presidents, and we played on all the different late night TV shows, and the Earth, Wind and Fire thing sold out Madison Square Garden and different arena gigs, and we just did 3 nights at the Hollywood Bowl with the LA Symphony, which was just an amazing experience. So I mean, it just seems like there's still things that keep getting checked off. The next one that's on the list that they're trying to make happen is a Super Bowl halftime show. And if that happens, that'll be pretty amazing too. So, it's just, it's been a crazy ride, and it's still fun after all these years for me.
Yeah. And it's still not over. In terms of your guitaring style, when you joined the band and now, what was sort of your intention of contributing to the band? Was it just like, okay, I'm just going to learn these songs and play them note for note? Or did you say, okay, I've got my own style, I'm going to try to... So how did you see your role in the band then and now?
Well, here's kind of the deal. I was so steeped in the music of Chicago that a lot of it was kind of in my DNA already. Even though I had most of the songs I had never actually learned or played, it was already in my DNA. I just had to get it under my hands. I did not approach it from a note for note perspective by any stretch. But I certainly did honor the late great Terry Kath in the way I approached, the rhythm parts to the songs, and anything that was signature I certainly kept, but the band encouraged individuality and put your own spin on things. So I was able to sort of stretch out, and for example, on 25 or 6 to 4, the first 8 bars of the guitar solo is so signature that I play that note for note every night, and from there I launch off into Being Me. And Being Me has some elements of Terry in there because I certainly listened to him enough that there's some of that in there. And then there's also quite a bit of Steve Lukather from Toto, Eddie Van Halen, Jeff Beck, who were my other big influences. And ironically enough, Steve Lukather and Michael Landau and Paul Jackson Jr. are the guys that played on the David Foster era records, the 16 and 17. And so the fact that I was sort of steeped in those guys as well and had those sounds and that sort of more 80s polished thing, made me well qualified to do the Foster era stuff as well as the 70s era stuff, which I think was part of what made me the right fit for the band, because I could honor the more R&B retro stylings of Terry and the 70s stuff because I had that in me, but I also had really, really steeped in the LA session guitar player thing in the 80s, and had that to offer as well. So that covered basically the whole ball of wax of what the band does live. I can shift gears in and out of that sort of Terry to Lukather thing. So, to answer your question, it still is to try to represent the music as faithfully as possible and bring the essence of all of those records to the table, and then having the ability to be myself when it's called for.
The last studio album goes back to 2014. Where are we in making a new studio album? And also, how important is it at this point to have new music? I mean, Chicago, like Aerosmith or Kiss, you can go out there and put your name on the marquee and the fans are going to show up regardless. How important is it to have new music available?
Well, you know what, as as an artist and as a band, creating new music is sort of necessary for the, to keep the soul of the band alive and keep the band excited about being creative and scratching that itch, because these guys are all still very creative. Robert Lamb is still constantly writing and conceiving of new music, and and guys that had outlets with solo projects and different things like that. But it's almost more important to the band to make new music than it is to the band's legacy and career, because there's going to be the die-hard fans that are going to buy the new stuff and they're going to dig it and it's going to be great. But to appeal to a really massive audience with it in the current state of the record business is difficult. All of the bands that we mentioned earlier, whether it's Journey or Toto or Foreigner or REO Speedwagon, Chicago, bands make records, and obviously they don't sell like they did in the 70s or the 80s, just because that's just not the way.
Right, and nobody does, by the way.
Market. Nobody does. I mean, unless you're, Bruno Mars or one of these, mega stars, of today. But the legacy bands, people really do want to come to relive their memories and hear those songs that they came to hear. And you can put maybe one or two new things in there, and that's not going to make anybody crazy. But if you put, 7 new songs into the set, people are going to be going to the bathroom and, going out for a drink, because, they want to hear Saturday in the Park and 25 or 6 to 4 and, Make Me Smile. And, that's what they're coming for.
Yeah, they really are.
And there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually a real quality problem to have in this day and age. Because, any of these younger bands and the new bands, you really, if you ask yourself, now, will this artist be around in 40 years or 50 years and still being able to tour and still being able to play their music? Or is this something that's going to happen for a brief period of, big record sales and big touring and then kind of go away? Because the timeless music of the 70s has really stood up. And I'm not sure some of the more current stuff will. Some of it will, just like, I guess, some of it,
Well,
you ever tune in and listen to, like, American Top 40? They replay it on satellite radio sometimes, the old Casey Kasem in the 70s.
Absolutely.
And it's amazing when you listen to it. Out of the 40 songs, you'll hear, like, 18 or 20 that are like classics that are all over classic rock radio and are still getting airplay. And the rest of them you haven't heard since they were in the top 40. And they're side by side. And you're like, wow, what happened to that song? Or what happened to that artist?
And that is an important point, because it is a rare thing to have a career that lasts even 5 years in the music business. Your Chicagos and your Journeys and your Aerosmiths and your Rolling Stones, are such a huge exception that they've had a career that lasts for so long. In terms of longevity, Robert recently said that the band is never going to end. We're just sort of going to ride it until we can't. Um, is that sort of how you see it as well? That you just keep this going?
Well, I didn't really used to look at it that way. I always kind of wondered, you know, I like to say when I joined the band, I had just turned 30, and all the original guys had just turned 50. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, I probably get 5 years out of this, before they're going to want to hang it up. Certainly by age 55, they're going to want to retire. Now here we are, and I'm in my early 50s, and those guys are older than that, and now it looks like there's no end in sight. So it's sort of, and also we're just seeing that a lot of these bands are able to continue with personnel changes and there's some bands out on the road that don't even have one original member still out there, and they're still playing the music and still, maybe someday there'll be a Chicago where it'll be, hey, Keith, you actually played with the original guys at one point, didn't you? Where it just keeps going. Who knows?
Well,
we'll see.
It's important that you mentioned that, because I was going to actually talk to you about the personnel changes. Because it's never diluted the product. The product has always been exceptionally high quality, and it does speak to how brand is bigger than band, right?
It is, and Chicago certainly is probably one of the most productive examples of that in terms of, Jim Guercio, when he originally conceived of, conceptually calling the band Chicago, having it known as the logo, numbering the albums, not putting anybody's face on the cover. It was all in a very sort of calculated. We want to put something out there where the music and the logo is what people think of first, and the band will be able to survive personnel changes because it'll be somewhat of a faceless entity. Now, Peter Cetera became a face in the MTV era for that brief period with Stay the Night and You're the Inspiration, and so that sort of that happened. But obviously, the band survived his departure. They survived Terry Kath's death, and they've other personnel changes over the years. The one constant, though, has been that horn section, which is, pretty much the integral part of the connection of what this thing is. Jimmy and Lee Loughnane in particular. Walt Parazater is still in the band, but he doesn't tour as much as he used to for health reasons. But that original horn section and Robert Lamb, keep us tied to the
roots,
to the legacy, to the original. As soon as we hit, does anybody really know what time it is? And Robert starts singing, you can see people just go, yep, that's it. That's the voice. That's the sound. So.
And it's funny that you mentioned the faceless thing, in a sense, because I've seen Foreigner 4 times in the last year, and 3 times there wasn't a single original member. And you know what? It didn't distract from the fun one bit. The band was great. The song sounded great. So it's just...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I know those guys, and actually Bruce Watson, who's a guitar player, playing with them in Mick's absence.
Great
and
guy.
I think he plays even... Yeah, and I mean, the band is smoking. I saw them not that long ago as well, and, when you're putting not to use a football analogy, but when you're putting a product on the field that's that good, and those songs are being represented that well, it's, people are not disappointed.
No, it's tough to complain.
Yeah, it's a great band.
Yeah, and I sort of compare it to a baseball team. people say, well, Babe Ruth is the Yankees, but he hasn't been a Yankee for many years, and people still go out to the games and enjoy them. So why not go out and enjoy Foreigner and Chicago and all these bands? You
That's
meant,
funny you say that, because I followed Joe Montana to Kansas City when he played for the Chiefs in the early '90s, and I've been a Chiefs fan ever since. And basically, people have said to me, "Well, you followed Joe Montana there, and he was only there for 2 years, so you're basically rooting for the jerseys or the city that you've never lived in." And I said, "Well, but that's my team."
yeah, yeah, and that's sort of how I see Chicago and Foreigner. Those are the songs I grew up with, and the product or the guys that are playing them now sound as good, in some cases better than the originals. And so, hey, why not? Let's go have fun on a Friday night. You mentioned Peter Cetera, and I was going to sort of stay away from that, but the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, obviously you know the story. Was that expected from you? Was it a disappointment? Was it a so what? How did you view that situation?
Well, it didn't surprise me. And I will just say this, obviously for me, coming from a fan first and a member second, it was very exciting for me to get to play with Danny Seraphin. And it would have been really exciting for basically me to get up there and play with the surviving 6 of the original 7 members of the band if Peter had been there. And that was kind of a bucket list thing I was looking forward to. But I understand it, because the band and Peter it's sort of like it's like an ex-wife or a bad marriage that ended in a not great way. And they started talking to work out what they were going to do for the thing, and some of the old issues between them cropped right back up, and Peter decided he didn't want to do it. As a result, it sort of was, he was making some demands, and the band was sort of saying, no, we need to do it this way. And he said, no, I want to do it that way. And then it just didn't happen. So it's unfortunate, and it's unfortunate for the fans specifically, but I understand it. I get it.
Yeah, and I've seen that happen before with Van Halen, with Kiss, with Guns N' Roses. It is what it is. In terms of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame itself, though, it took an exceptionally long time for the Hall to recognize the band. As a fan yourself, who started off as a fan, was that sort of a head scratcher where you go, what are you waiting for? I mean, it's been 40 years, 50 years. I mean, come on. How did you take that? Does it even matter to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
Oh, well, you know what? It does matter, because
okay.
it is something that is going to be there for eternity. And, it certainly was well received and accepted with gratitude by our original guys, and they were very flattered and honored, even though it did take a lot longer than it probably should have. But I've always contended, and I had come to believe that it was never going to happen, to be honest with you, because it got passed over so many times. But if you kind of look at the history of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, there's a lot of bands out there that should be in that still aren't. And it kind of seems like now they're starting to bring in, this Cheap Trick, Steve Miller Band. Some of these bands, they should have been in sooner as well. I think Yes is still not in. The Doobie Brothers are still not in. But yet you've got some one-hit wonders that had, one hit in the 60s that are in. It's a little bit of a head scratcher, which kind of makes you think. I always thought that if Chicago had recorded CTA and then had died in a plane crash or broken up immediately afterwards and only released that one record, they would have been in immediately upon eligibility. There was something about the fact that the band just continued to work and continued to tour and stuck around for as long as they had that sort of made the hall say, well, these guys should have hung it up a long time ago or something. You know what I mean? Just sort of, it was kind of a strange perception that I think kept them out. And maybe, the music that was made in the 80s that maybe they didn't think was as congruent with what the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame represents as the 70s music that they made, might have brought them down a notch in their, respectability in their eyes, which I disagree, because I think the stuff the band did in the 80s was every bit as cool and valid. It was just different, and it was a different era.
Yeah. But, it's strange how they do that. And you look at some of the biggest bands, especially in the heavy metal genre, your Iron Maidens, your Judas Priest, that have been, you can't argue that they're all, they're Hall of Fame bands, and yet they don't even get looked at. And we'll finish we'll finish with this because you've done some solo projects, Howland, and the last name has always tricked me up, but Imboden, I guess, is that how you say it?
Yes, Tristan Bowden, our drummer. Yes, it's Swiss. It's a Swiss name.
Yeah,
Imboden.
You've done some stuff with him. You also released Craig back in 2007. Yeah. Are you working on any other solo albums, projects, or anything outside of Chicago?
Actually, yes, and I'm glad you brought that up. We're right now in the final mixing stages of a record that I'm really proud of. It's actually the whole thing started when we were on the road with the Doobie Brothers, and John Cowan, who plays bass and sings with the Doobie Brothers, and he was also the lead singer frontman of a band called Newgrass Revival. Him and Ed Toth, the drummer that plays with the Doobs, who was also in a band called Vertical Horizon, and I all discovered that we all lived in Nashville, so we started a little band project, and we started doing gigs around town, just doing cover tunes. We were doing Hendrix and Cream and just kind of trio stuff that was kind of fun to just get out and blow out the cobwebs. But we started writing music, and we're getting ready to release a record, and the name of the band previously was Secret Agent Orange, but we just changed the name. We're going to call the band Button, Button. So the band is going to be called Button, and the record should be out before the end of the year. So, and it's really cool stuff. It's vocal pop, but it's sort of there's definite sort of jam band elements, and it's real organic stuff. So, yeah, I'm pretty excited about that.
If you could compare it to a band, what would it sort of sound like? Are we talking, is it Foreigner? Is it the Beatles? Is it Rolling Stones? Is it, in terms of, is it government? It just is.
Yeah. Were you getting ready to say Government Mule?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's got jam stuff, right?
It's probably more in that vein.
Okay.
But it's really hard to describe. It's like I say, it's kind of got my John Cowan refers to it as what do you call it, hillbilly jazz, because it's got a lot of improvisation, but there's I don't even know, elements of there are some country elements in it because of John's background in bluegrass. So it's kind of all over the map, but it's really fun stuff.
In terms of finding it, is it going to be available through the regular outlets, your iTunes, your Amazon, and all that, or do they have to go to CD Baby?
It should be, yeah.
Okay, and
well, we probably will release it through CD Baby, but it will be on, all the digital sites and whatnot. But there's a few tunes on iTunes right now. If you go up and you look, Secret Agent Orange. There's a tune called Christopherson. There's a tune called 3 Minute Egg. And there's a tune called Digit, which are all up under the name Secret Agent Orange on iTunes, which are all 3 tunes that are going to be on the Button record. And those are the recordings that are going on there. So if you want to kind of get an idea what it sounds like, you can go check those out. Even though we've now changed the name and can kind of re-release it, and not that many people heard those anyway. We put them up as singles.
We're going to change that. We're going to make sure more and more people hear that stuff. Keith, absolute pleasure today.
Yeah, man, it's been great to talk to you. And will we see you in Montreal?
Yes, I'm absolutely hoping I will be there.
Okay.
Look
That
forward to it.
sounds good. All
Thank you,
right. Well,
thank you, sir.
all right. We'll talk to you soon.
There you have it, folks. My interview with Chicago guitarist Keith Howland. Please check them out on tour with Earth, Wind, and Fire. You can find all information and news about the band at chicagotheband.com. While you're on the internet, please head over to Twitter and check me out at Mitch Lafon, MITCHLAFON, one-on-one Mitch Lafon on Facebook, and paypal.me/Mitch Lafon should you care to support the podcast. And with that, I bid you a fond farewell, adieu, bonsoir, auf Wiedersehen, and all that other stuff. Bye for now. Oh my.